I mean, first of all, geographically, Cherry Hill, Curtis Bay are geographically separated from the rest of the city, right? Like, if it wasn't for what we call the Hanover Street Bridge or the the Vietnam Veteran Memorial Bridge, it's literally on the other side of the water, right? We're literally on the other side of the middle branch of the Patapsco River. And historically, and even now, this area has been characterized as, I guess, what people might call a wasteland because of industrial pollution. I'm talking about that goes back 1800s, since from anything, when we talking about canning industry, we're talking about coal production, a bunch of stuff, right, that continues to happen today. This is the area where black people, the promised land that black people were given. I told you before that black people were, this area was developed for black people, not out of benevolence. And those who live in Curtis Bay and Brooklyn are the descendants of black people, Latinx immigrants, and then the descendants of Eastern European workers who were also laborers. So the spatial apartheid that you talked about, this disconnectivity from the city, and then this disconnectivity from our own heritage and all of this that we talked about, the separateness, shows up and has a trajectory that lasts hundreds of years at this point. Low quality air pollution that's been backed up by science, right? And it's not just Curtis Bay. I mean, Curtis Bay is unfortunately the bedrock of it. But there was a study about 10 years ago now that showed that the air pollution that Curtis Bay, that unfortunately is centralized in, Brooklyn, Curtis Bay, also permeates the rest of the southern, kind of region of the city, which not only impacts people's health, it impacts other beings' health. We're on the water, we're on the Patapsco River. I think about and I don't know that this is a direct tie-in. From a personal standpoint, my father, who lived in one of the areas that currently is not inhabited by human beings, it's called Fairfield. My father grew up in Fairfield for a significant portion of his life. My father is the oldest. My grandmother is the oldest. Grandmother from South Carolina. She moves here. Her parents move her here. My grandmother passed at, I think, about 42 years old. And my father at 47. His sister, who also lived in Fairfield, passed in her 40s. You see what I'm saying? None of them had cancer, but they had some other health conditions that I'm sure that living in this area did not help. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, passed at 69 years old, where the life expectancy in Cherry Hill specifically is 69 years. She met the statistic that somebody spoke to.
I ended up taking a vacation to Iowa. I was out there for probably about a week and a half, so long enough, and I noticed that I was like, wow, my breathing is wonderful out here. I came home from that trip and I had such a bad asthma attack that I ended up in the ICU. I had torn a hole in my left lung. My pulmonologist came in and he talked to me, and when he was like, what triggered this attack? I said, honestly, I don't know. We are in Brooklyn, Maryland, which is the southernmost neighborhood in Baltimore City, alongside Curtis Bay, and then we're right on the Anne Arundel County line with the city. Southern Baltimore is one of the most industrial neighborhoods in Baltimore City. We have CSX with a lot of the coal work here, and you also have it integrated with communities that live here. There are families that have come here to work with these industrious companies. And then they end up being here for generations. And what happens is it feels like the air quality becomes so affected that you hear people talk about generational asthma and generational breathing problems. And the more you start talking to them and the more you start thinking about it, the more you wonder, is it generational really? Is it something that is coming through their family, or is it something that's coming from the environment that they're living in? This school has over 700 students, and I would say that the majority of our students have some level of diagnosis of asthma. It affects their attendance. Our families walk to school, so they're walking in this environment and they sometimes are exposed to the elements, which again also puts you at risk for catching something or being, basically families will tell us, oh, you know what, I chose not to send my child to school today because of the air quality outside. So it's something that you don't really think would be an issue of having all of these respiratory problems, but one of the things that we're starting to see a lot of is actually childhood obesity, because these kids want to go play outside, but then the mom's like, oh my gosh, well, he goes outside and he had an asthma attack. So every time he goes outside, he can't breathe. There are many times that as you're blowing your nose, you kind of can't help but notice that there's particles in it. And you wonder, like, where does it come from? And you feel it on your hands. Same thing on your cars. There's just, you find these particles, this film, it's a dust. And the air, honestly, like on a very, very hot day, it feels thick. It doesn't feel like there's things in it, but it just feels like a thick air. The way our neighborhood is, as I mentioned, we live below the poverty line here. Pretty much everybody here in this area is below the poverty line. So you don't have this ability to just say, I want to move, right? So we have a family home, or whether you own it or you're renting, this is where you are. So most of the time, this is where you stay. And that's why it's become a generational thing.